this. So appreciative that you're taking the time to join our EdChat. My name is Josh Clark. I'm the head of school of Landmark School. And you have joined one of our fireside chats looking at the intersection of artificial intelligence, education, and what this might mean for students with dyslexia and other associated learning differences. I am so excited and so appreciative to have with us today Dr. Krishna. See, I do it. Save it for me, Krishna.
Madhavan.
Thank you. Thank you. I warned him ahead of time that I panic over names. But Krishna, I think if I'm correct in saying, one of your professional, maybe your personal goals is to empower people to achieve their full potential through the use of AI. I read that about you. Krishna is responsible for ensuring the long-term growth of the Microsoft education business. As an expert with over 25 years of experience in artificial intelligence and machine learning, cloud infrastructure, and product development, he is also responsible for driving all the GPU and AI workload planning for Microsoft education business, which I think means, Krishna, tell me if I'm right, you are kind of the project lead for all things Microsoft education and AI. Is that kind of a fair synopsis?
Well, I wish I could really take credit for all of it, but there are some amazing colleagues that lead fantastic products that Microsoft is building in this space. We have a huge class of products called learning accelerators that are led by phenomenal leads, Mike Tolson and Mikhail Gideoni. Deirdre Quanstrom, our VP, has put a strategy together that really enables us to leverage this technology for doing good as well as driving innovation. So there is a huge team of product managers and engineers that work with us. I'm a very small piece of the puzzle. I do all the GPU planning and things like that. And I have some experience in AI over the years, but I would attribute all of that to the great team that we have here.
Well, you are very kind and so much more humble than me. I would just take full credit for everything. And prior to Microsoft, and I was giving Krishna a hard time about this, he was an associate professor in the College of Engineering at Purdue University, where he also did his doctoral work. And I gave him a hard time because I am a graduate of Indiana University, the superior college in the state of Indiana, if you will. But a longtime rival of Purdue. And I also want to highlight, and Krishna, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you are kind enough today to come and share your experience, your thoughts, and your expertise as someone who's an expert and immersed in this field and happens to work for Microsoft, but you are not here today as a representative of Microsoft or to kind of speak to Microsoft's plans and futures and all of those things. Is that fair to clarify?
Correct. I am not here representing Microsoft, although everywhere I speak, I am always an employee of Microsoft. And but look, the company is very open about how we talk about these things and our difficulties and challenges and how we navigate through all of this. We are all about learning from people. So even if I were to say something that from a company standpoint was not approved, people are like, of course, we are learning through all this. So it's a very different kind of company inside here. So yes, I'm not representing Microsoft, but I have all the latitude in the world to say truth to power.
Well, thank you so much. And it's interesting because a little bit of a tangent. There's some other folks that I have spoken with who maybe work in similar fields who agreed and were excited, but then their company said, actually, we're not going to have any public comments on anything AI right now. So I think it's just interesting. So very much appreciate you doing this. And again, the culture that you just referenced. I will also point out that I unfortunately have no financial stake in Microsoft. I wish I did at this point, but I don't. And while I have the great opportunity to partner with Microsoft on some things through my role with Made by Dyslexia, and Mike and Deidre and other folks have gotten to do some wonderful things. That's all great volunteer work, but so there's no formal connection here. With that said, I'd love to kind of just jump in, and I think Krishna, I told you this prior to, but I'd like to start all these conversations with just a simple question of, what was school like for you, right? Because we're talking about school and education and all those things. That's one of the few things that all of us have in common, or at least many of us. So what was school like for you?
I grew up in Southeast India in a city called Chennai, and we were what I would call very low income. And we lived in a community where poverty was the norm, and it was very difficult to navigate as people living in a community where the infrastructure was still being worked on for very many years after the Indian independence. I was fortunate enough that my parents, through great effort, figured out a way to send me to a school that was really, really one of the top academic schools in the area. And it's the school's name is DAV Higher Secondary School. And it was a good couple of kilometers away from my house. We would just walk there as kids through all the infrastructure that needed work, through slums, and it was quite an experience. And we would do this as a group of kids going there. And for us, school was a way to actually get out of a lot of the difficulties that we were having, right? Like, so education was high priority. And yes, after work, I would work in various places, make some money here and there, but education was always the top thing. And I have very fond memories of my school growing up, for the academic rigor that it inculcated in me, but also the ability to question things critically. So we would work on problems and questions, and teachers were very open and honest about the science of what we were reading, and we were never discouraged from having questions that were somehow outside the curriculum that mattered to us. And we had a lot of instruction on how to think about things in general. And the exams were, yes, they were very memory based, as many of the exams in India, but there were almost always critical aspects to it in everything that we did. And I learned a few skills that today are very critical for me in my job. For example, writing, and organized thinking, and how to, put an argument together. All of those big things that I value today were all part of my education. And I thank all the teachers who were very patient with me. I was not always a very, focused student, because I had this ability to just remember things, and that was good and bad. So, yeah, it was awesome though. I look back at it very fondly.
That's great. That's great. And thank you for sharing that story, first of all. And that just that trajectory, right, of the difference that education made for you, that your family's intervened to make that education. And so many folks that tune into this have some kind of association with students with dyslexia or learning differences or learning challenges. And anyway, I love these stories because while your challenges in school or your challenges to avail yourself to education were, very different, right, and pragmatic, and it was, infrastructure, poverty, and all these things, the importance of the role it played, I think, resonates so much with folks who also need education and have a hard time accessing it for different reasons. But anyway, it's always so great to see role models and hear those stories. So thank you for sharing that. And to kind of just dive into the topic at hand, and Krishna, I have a list of questions, but we can go wherever we want.
Yeah, sure, please.
We can meander, but curious to begin with, I would love to hear your definition of AI, because it's, a term that is so broad right now, being used in all different contexts. How do you define AI?
So AI for me is a set of technologies that essentially allow us to harness the power of machines to do things algorithmically that humans spend a lot of blank cycles on, like organizing things, or remembering things, when we could be engaged in more productive endeavors. More from a technical point of view, it is really the art. I'm not using the word science here, the art of helping machines really understand how humans think and act. Now, AI is very, very far away from any serious human capability. However, the current generation of technologies that you're seeing have been in the works for more than 50 to 60 years. And it went through a period of what they call the AI winter, when the investments in these kinds of innovative work in both computer science, mathematics, and also to scale out some of these works was still missing. And there were some very many great people who worked in that field during those AI winter times. And now you're seeing the effect of all of those. And it's also a convergence. It represents a convergence of computation, information, processing power, and a whole bunch of other very significant landmark achievements that humans should be very proud of.
Thank you for that. And I want to stick on that for just a minute, because you're the first person, and I love it, that has used art to define this, right? And I've been doing a lot of reading, and what's fascinating to me when I read books about AI, at some point, if not in the beginning, throughout, it becomes very philosophical. Like there's this whole, what is intelligence? What is cognition? So do you mind talking for a minute, a little bit more about that art piece? Because I think most of us think of it as, well, it's all about programming, but it's not necessarily, it's more complex.
No, the programming is an expression of the art form, right? So just like we use English to communicate our thoughts and ideas, mathematics and programmings are ways of expressing how machines should act and learn from human artifacts, right? The problem with just treating artificial intelligence as a purely computational artifact is that you lose the humanity in it. You lose the fact that it is embodied with all the good and bad that humans are well known for. In fact, Deirdre had sent me an article for those of you who don't know, Deirdre is my boss. She's an amazing leader and reads a great deal. And so she sent me this article from Vox that was published just last week on what would happen if AI treats humans the way we treat animals. And the article basically makes a case that humans are basically very dismissive of many other species. And in our algorithms, we actually embody those artifacts. So the algorithms also have a tendency to mimic those very same dismissive behaviors. And it's a very philosophical outlook on what human values do we need to express in the algorithms? What human values do we need to express as mathematics? And it's not the other way around. Sometimes the problem is that the mathematics is not there to express the human values that we need. It's not the other way around.
So that's fascinating, especially that animal analogy. I had not think about that at all. And I think that is something important for us all to kind of think about and remember, that these are humans building machines, and
Yes.
we are going to bring with us the limitations, the biases. And I think it's important clarification. I always think about when I hear, AI can lead to, perpetuate bias. And I think all that's true, but it's not the machine that's perpetuating bias or originating the bias. It's us feeding this machine bias.
Correct. And in fact, the machine is not capable of identifying what these biases are without some human intervention actually in the middle that says, hey, when you encounter these kinds of scenarios, here is how you should behave. If you think of AI as in the growth cycle in human years, it's hardly 2 or 3 months old. And the lifespan is like 100 years. So in the larger scope of things, it's a very, very, early stage of its development, despite the fact that people have been working on it for a long time. The real commoditization of AI is just about starting. And now you're going to see what the other concerns and considerations are that we need to factor in. Look, Microsoft is seen as being ahead in a lot of the AI work, but every single day I'm involved in highly philosophical conversations inside the company with amazing people who really think about this from a very fundamental point of view. They ask very difficult questions that most people, even in the academic side, are unable to answer, because it is grounded in human artifacts. And that's the core of how we think about the whole AI space, hence the use of the word art.
Yeah. Again, and I love it. And I want to circle back to that in a moment. But before we do, another question for you, just given your kind of obviously expertise in this area, we also hear machine learning all the time.
Yeah.
What exactly is machine learning? Can you help us, like layman's terms, understand that?
Yeah. So machine learning is the Uber category in which AI sits. So machine learning also includes some very traditional algorithms that will do simple prediction. Right? Like given a set of data points on stock behavior, can you simply, using a very simple equation, which is linear, predict what the stock price will be tomorrow? It's a very naive way of thinking about it, but machine learning algorithms will do that. Now, machine learning algorithms have, of course, become a lot more sophisticated, and there's a lot of work that has gone into it over very many years. And in fact, machine learning is the place which was the genesis of artificial intelligence. Now, the fundamental difference is in machine learning, we are constantly telling the machine what data artifacts to pay attention to and what data artifacts the algorithm should infer on. In artificial intelligence, you tell the machine, hey, here's a data set, and here's a general way in which you can learn from the data set. And the algorithms then learn based on your guidance what these pathways are. So machine learning traditionally, very specific instructions on what data points and tagging the data in a very appropriate way and telling the machine exactly how to process it. Artificial intelligence generalizes that and says, hey, here's a bunch of data. I really don't know the structure of this. I really don't understand how this data is being set up, how it's tagged. All that I know is this is a bunch of data. And in general, it's in this space. And when humans look at data, here's how we kind of process it, right? Like, so that's the fundamental difference.
Super helpful, that clarification. And so, and on that, we all read, and I'm trying to understand that there is conversation that sometimes AI, and again, I'm using that in very broad terms, right? But these AI systems produce things that we don't fully understand how they came to that conclusion. And when I first read about that, my kind of a naivete around it was, like OpenAI does this. They don't want to share that proprietary information. That's why we don't know. But am I coming to understand correctly that literally sometimes we just don't understand how it's able to draw these conclusions that end up being right and accurate, but we can't even go back and trace the logic, if you will. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, Josh, I think the phenomena that you're talking about is generally termed hallucination, although that term is not really a very good term because it has implications for people with mental health considerations. So the term that we use inside Microsoft is fabrication, which means that the algorithms tend to fabricate artifacts when it's not there in the data. And the reason why that happens is, if you really think about the fundamental mathematics that is used to express, how the artificial intelligence algorithms are supposed to behave, they're highly probabilistic in nature. And on top of that, they layer on top additional probability layers that essentially say, hey, here's how you should propagate the information through this massive network of mathematics. And so at every point, there is a little bit of loss in translation, right? And because it's probabilistic, the mathematics is actually doing what it's supposed to do, where it's saying, hey, I'm just going to assign a little bit of probability to this. I'm going to pick this result to pass on to the next layer. It's just like, think about it as a massive complex of networks on mathematics. Think of these as all these cities that are interconnected with mathematics. And the algorithm decides which road you can take based on some sort of information function, okay? And so at every stage, there's a little bit of movement, there's a little bit of probabilistic interpretation, and that is another thing that makes it art. Because why does it behave like that? The mathematics behaves like, no, there's a lot of effort being put into understanding why machines learning algorithms and AI in general fabricates. And at Microsoft, there is a lot of work that people are doing on explainability of models, right? Like, so why is the model producing what it's producing? And for education, this is particularly important because let's say that you ask the AI model like ChatGPT, hey, what is the first law of thermodynamics? And it produces an answer. And then you want to immediately follow up and say, why did you produce this answer? And you want the explainability piece. But explainability is a small part of how you ensure that the inner workings of the model is transparent. Now, OpenAI is not saying, well, we have the answer and we're not going to give it to you because of some, that's not it. It is truly a hard computational problem.
So it is, which is again, the fascinating part to me, it is, we have created systems so complex that we ourselves, the creators, don't fully understand the subtleties which have huge implications. But to your point about how these mathematics work and the connections and the probabilities that they're connecting, it's not like AI can show its work, if you will, right?
Actually, AI can show its work, right? Like, so at various layers, you can extract what the AI systems are doing, how the information gets passed, and the way it does it is through mathematics. Now, the challenge is, how do you make that mathematics accessible to people in ways that they can use for decision making, right? Um, yeah, but there are times, as you were pointing out, where the mathematics is not obvious; it's opaque, and
Yeah.
there may be new mathematics that is needed in order to express that. But the behavior of these systems are not completely unknown, because after all, we created the mathematics that dictates how this information should flow and how it should be received on the other end, and so on. Now, making it transparent, and because these models have now grown in size, now we are talking about several billions of parameters, it is hard to synthesize all of that and to figure out exactly at which point the algorithm has made a decision to go one route or another. And there's a tremendous amount of investment that's happening in the space on the explainability of these algorithms. Now, it's not an easy challenge, because to make the AI do what it's doing right now, the complexity needed is definitely high. And the mathematics needed is very sophisticated, but at the very root of it, it's still very, the humans created it.
Again, fascinating. And I promise I will stop nerding out in a minute. And we'll get
No,
back
sure,
to the part, but I
absolutely
love this.
happy to.
So on that point, one thing I read yesterday, which really resonated with me, to your point about some of it's a little opaque or it's super complex. We as humans don't fully understand how we learn certain aspects of what we learn, right?
Correct.
I mean, there are things, especially in my world of students with learning differences, we're super explicit. There's things that we know, but there's also things that we don't know. We don't understand why it works that way or it doesn't work. So I found that to be, again, this philosophical connection that's fascinating, that it's not as if we humans already have these answers and these machines don't. It is reflective of learning to some degree.
Yeah, and all of the artificial intelligence algorithms, what they have in common is they are designed to map the way the human neurons work, okay, in a network. Now, remember earlier in the conversation, I said that, hey, there's a convergence of some very major things that essentially led to the point of AI being what it is today. It is really a confluence of, info, bio, cogno, and nano. So you see all of these artifacts starting to come together in AI as an embodiment of all of this. You need massive amount of computation in order to make some of these big models work. Um, when you use it, yes, there is a computational load that we need, but to build these models is even harder. And that comes from a lot of understanding of biological systems, neurosystems, and also information technology, how information gets retrieved. So there's uncertainty in all of these domains, and AI is at the point of convergence of all of this. So it does embody some of the work that is needed to understand more about how the human brain works, how does information get truly propagated in the human brain. Of course, there's a lot of science behind it over the years, but to modify all of that into a space where you can explain it to people is really coming together of multiple fields of expertise, which is also a human complexity that we have to deal with.
Yeah. Again, so interesting. And I promise my last kind of wonky question, and viewers will get back to more kind of practical things. But on that same field, but it can be difficult to, because it's this convergence of so many expertise, to then be able to explain that to people that are more specialized, right, versus generalized. Fascinating to me. Am I also right that in certain situations, not broadly yet, but there's been situations where AI can actually make connections that we as humans would not see, do not see, and we almost have to kind of learn backwards. Like, for example, I read that there was a out of MIT, I was involved with this, with the human race, developed an antibiotic that previously was to address the bacteria that previously was resistant. And it was a use of AI that found connections that we humans did not see and maybe could not have seen, and yet has produced. Is that a fair kind of anecdote around the potential of this kind of technology?
Yeah. So look, as the amount of data increases, the gap in data increases exponentially. Okay. Now, these AI systems are able to look at a lot of data as a single universe of artifacts that they are receiving. Whereas humans cannot process that amount of data. And this is one of the advantages of having machine learning and AI, right? And therefore, those algorithms are able to draw connections where human capability can be augmented by the machine's ability to really map so much data and keep all that in context for the work it's doing. So this is where you see when making these kinds of connections, the question for whether there is an antibiotic that can treat, some bacteria that's resistant to traditional care. The question came from the human, and the machine is only augmenting the human's ability to answer that. So it's not like the machine came up with this question and said, "Oh, look, I can actually answer a question on like how these drug resistant." So we are very far. So that's artificial general intelligence, right? Like, so there is no intelligence really in artificial intelligence right now. It's more artificial than intelligence. So
I appreciate that so much. I wrote down single universe. I love that kind of phrasing, right? It's able to just look at all these things that we as humans just don't have the capacity to think about. And I love that point about, and I so appreciate you kind of ground us in that. It started with somebody asking a question. The AI did not come together and say, we should solve this. And one of my previous guests had made mention of, as in education, there's this fear that AI will take over the humanities and writing and critical thinking and all these things. But I think to your point, it actually might put a spotlight on the need for it, because at least in the near future, we have to generate these questions. And in fact, when I use ChatGPT, my biggest challenge is to figure out, it can do anything, and I run out of things for it to do. Like, I am the limitation at this point, not its capabilities.
Look, ultimately, all of these algorithms, all the work that you're seeing in Chat GPT and all of the AI that are under the so-called umbrella of large language models, they all are really good at guessing the next best word. Okay, in the sense, they are stochastic parrots. They will tell you what's the next best word, and they will tell you that better than you could imagine that. However, let's not mistake that for creativity. Let's not mistake that for a teacher asking a student a critical question that prompts them to think in directions where the AI can actually fill in the next best word. So I think what you're also experiencing with some of this in education, for example, is a true trigger for us to switch from a memory-based system to a more critical system. By the way, Bloom's taxonomy already talks about this. These are all apex conditions that we are moving towards in terms of learning. Previously, it was just like, hey, can you recognize this? No, yeah, but the AI can recognize it much better than you can, because it has a larger body of work to draw from. But it's also a very low-level task. Can you ask a critical question? That is where human creativity really is about to shine, and has always been shining, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, and I think so many things about that. One is I completely agree, and I also think it is an opportunity for education to better reflect what we actually do in the world once we get out of school, right? I mean, to your point, in your experience, writing, critical thinking, organizing ideas, brought you to where you are today, and you still apply those. There's probably a ton of other crap you learned in school that you don't use on a daily basis, right? But that seemed important at the time, because it was more of this, like, we need to, everyone needs to know this particular rule or memorize this particular equation. And I think we can't, at the same time, I don't think for now we can over-index how disruptive that actually is. While it seems obvious, all of systems are based on memory and producing expected results.
Yeah, and Josh, the thing is this: education research for so many years has been telling us what the apex learning conditions are. What is comprehension? When do we know that students are demonstrating true learning? But those are harder to test, and those are harder to examine as artifacts that students produce. So we resort to small memory things like fill in the blanks with the next possible thing that you should have read from the book, or what is the formula for Einstein's theory of relativity, and how do you derive it, and all that is memory, right? But if you look at education theory, all of those are super low order consideration. Like, understanding E equals MC squared is completely different from just regurgitating the derivation for it from some book. The creativity in that is how does it become so parsimonious? How is it simplified? How do you synthesize the complex? Those are all considerations that the education research has always said are the apex learning things that we want to target. And so at Microsoft, if I can for a minute talk about it, yes, we are thinking about all of these concerns, but our larger question is how do we actually enable people to operate in that highest hierarchy of learning where you're really unleashing human creativity for problem solving at levels that we couldn't do before. That is transformation. Now, being another memory aid is very important, don't get me wrong, and in context, it could be life-saving. But all of learning is going through the shift where all of a sudden you have these tools that can lift you up, which means that change is happening, right, at a very rapid pace.
Well, yes, and again, I love that. And I love you kind of speaking to this because here you are, you're a scientist, you're an engineer, and you're talking philosophically. You're not talking about, making sure I could navigate my graphing calculator, which I'm sure is important and necessary and all those things. But where you are being tested, I feel like now as an expert in your field, are these larger questions of humanities and critical thinking that we're so afraid AI is going to take away from us. But it seems like one of the things you're suggesting is it's going to actually become more critical. We're going to be able to spend more time developing that.
Yeah. And AI will amplify human traits, but it's only an amplifier. If you don't have the trait, it's not going to do anything to make something happen where there is none, right? Humans are capable of critical thinking. Humans are capable of critical processing. Humans are capable of synthesizing information and communicating that in a very simple way in day-to-day life. We take all that for granted. However, to get the machines to do what we do on a daily basis, for example, should I go out for a walk or not? That's a decision, right? Like, I mean, that machine is not going to tell you whether you should go for a walk and how your body feels that day. So that's still a human artifact.
Yeah, that again, such a great point that humanity will become more important in many ways. Correct. As we build these relationships. All right, so kind of sticking on that a little bit, could you speak to, and it could be specific to Microsoft or not at all, but what excites you right now about what AI in the now term or in the near term could bring to education, the kind of the here and now?
Right. I mean, look, for very many years, the holy grail for education has been personalization, right? Mm-hmm. How do you bring in data and information and tools that enable educators to truly spend their time targeting the education that they give to students and students receive in personalized ways? In fact, the National Academy of Engineering still has personalized learning as one of the grand challenges. And we've not cracked that yet, right? My excitement here is that I think the AI systems that we are building today can make significant strides towards personalizing learning in ways that we could not do even a few years back, right? Here's an example. Microsoft has this amazing product called Reading Coach and Reading Progress, right? Like, I mean, you hear about it everywhere. And Josh, from your work on dyslexia, you know that this tool is so important for people with dyslexia because it enables them to read and process information better. Now, that product has so many amazing innovations built into it. And if you ever have Mike Tolfson talk to you, he will tell you about nearly 15 years of work that has gone into building something like that, and even longer to build the underlying artificial intelligence and machine learning work that needed to power it. At the very tip of it, it's a very simple tool, right? I generate a passage, I'm going to read, the machine is going to understand what or is going to basically say, hey, you pronounce this word right, pronounce this word wrong. Yes, it has biases and all that, but still, it's going to give you a score. But look, teachers used to spend an inordinate amount of time assigning reading passages and grading the work that the students were producing over and over again. But now, all of a sudden, by the introduction of this tool, any student can start reading and do it hundreds of thousands of times if they so wish to, and get immediate feedback in ways that were not feasible for a teacher who's already overburdened in so many ways. Now, the good part is the tool will also produce information and give the teacher information saying, hey, in general, your students seem to be struggling with this word. That insight was not possible before. Now, AI and machine learning are allowing you to give that insight to a teacher, which was not possible before. That is transformative, right? Similarly, we are doing a whole bunch of other work that will enable teachers to be highly productive. Organize course content. Every year, teachers spend hundreds of thousands of hours, and it's millions aggregate across the world, putting course content together, processing all of that. Now, how amazing would it be if an AI can actually track that and help you organize things better, right? So those are the kinds of innovations that we are thinking about. For an individual teacher, even if you save 5 seconds, as a company for Microsoft, where we are dealing with millions of users, millions of teachers, that's 5 seconds times a million or a billion, right? That is worth investing in, right?
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. I always say, what compensation is important to teachers, no doubt about it. Of course, everyone needs to have a living wage, all these things. But even more so, or tied with that, is time. Yes. And that's why we see things like Teachers Pay Teachers and these other resources where you can go buy lesson plans and they're buying time, right?
Yeah.
So I love this.
It's the only commodity that you can't trade on, right? Like there's only one-way traffic on it. You spend it, that's it.
Yep. So. Yep. And I could go on forever, but in education, it's unique in that there is the prescribed time, which is the school day, and then this assumed time, which is the time afterwards. And for a variety of justifiable reasons, our goals and compensation have nothing to do with time or outcomes, most part. So anyway, but I won't get into that too much. But I will say, so with Reading Coach, so much about it excites me. One would just be, and Mike's amazing, and what he's created is amazing. And I probably saw it for the first time maybe 6 years ago. And from where we are, where it started, to now, you literally, kids, you could do fluency practice. And it, like you said, it will pick up on the words that kids have a difficult time decoding, circle back to them, help produce, similar traits, similar words with similar traits. And it's really, really remarkable. And what I also love about it, as somebody, I'm the head of a school for students with learning differences. I'm the chair of the International Dyslexia Association. I spend a lot of time thinking and working to try to help teachers get the training and insights they didn't get in undergraduate. And that's a whole other story. But what these tools also do is just highlight for teachers things that they didn't even necessarily realize were important, right? Correct. So there's a way of closing time, giving resources, but also giving insights that also excites me so much.
Yeah, it's not just the insight, it's actionable insight, right? Like, so you give the insight in a way where the teacher can say, oh, a bunch of my students are struggling with the word, phenomena. And I am going to generate a whole bunch of passages on this that is suited to what they are struggling with. And to do that effectively and with a single click, that is pretty amazing innovation right there.
Yep, I completely agree. And I also think it speaks to, especially in our elementary school programs, we ask and expect of our teachers to be experts in all kinds of fields, right? All kinds of fields. And so to your point, to give actionable insights in resources. So maybe I don't have to be an expert in everything, but that's not at the cost of my student, because the content that they need, that personalization, can keep going and carry forward.
Yeah, and often we lose track of the fact that the workload that teachers carry. And I think working in schools, Josh, you all don't ever lose track of it. But from the outside, for product makers, it's very easy to forget the level of the intensity of the work that goes into preparing for every class and getting ready for it. I mean, teachers make it look easy, but there's nothing easy about it on a day in and day out basis. And it comes at the cost of their time with their families. It comes at the cost of their hobbies and their learning time. And so Microsoft is very invested in, increasing productivity, which essentially is to free up time for other human endeavors. That's where the empowerment happens, right?
And what an interesting way of stating it, and a goal. Our goal is not to create AI or the best this or that. It's to create time for other human endeavors.
Yeah, the goal is never for us to, we don't ever think, it's funny because people think, oh, Microsoft, it's all AI all the time. Actually not. What is the human value for what we are building is the first question. If you ever take a product idea to my boss, Deirdre, the first question that she will ask is, what value are you really creating for that person who's going to use your product? It's not, oh, we have great AI. Yeah, that's important, but it's actually not as important as people might think in the larger questions. That the questions are never about the technology. The questions are always about human value.
Which is wonderful, right? So again, such good context for us to hear as educators too. It's, we are trying to create thinkers, not test takers. And that Correct. Shockingly gets, transfixed. We have a question in the chat that I think I'm going to paraphrase correctly. And it's actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about as well. So Jeff in the chat, if I misconstrue your question, please let me know. But it's, again, something I want to get to. As an example, there was a recent study, I think it was Duke University, forgive me, we'll try to find it and put it in when we publish this, but there was a study done looking at radiologists, and they looked at radiologists implementing AI. And to kind of bastardize this, I apologize, but essentially, as I understand, what they found was when radiologists use AI, it can actually, it augments, right? That AI does a really good job of identifying, certain aspects. Humans do as well. When we combine them, it's super powerful. But what happened was a lot of radiologists were like, well, that can't be right. So they almost came to the conclusion that though the ideal is the combination, in the short term, right now, the best application is either do all AI or do all human, because the human is so resistant to the AI. And I think, to Jeff's question in the chat, I think that's part of what the challenge is going to be with teachers. As it pushes us to think and do things differently, have you given thought, how do we get teachers on board with this?
Yeah, I think I kind of know the study. I think I read it a little bit back. Look, the teachers and everybody who uses AI, rightly so, should have some level of skepticism about what they are saying. And seeing, right? It is healthy. Now, at what point does it become so difficult to balance that the technology is no longer useful to a person is a very important question for us to think about. But in AI, one of the things that is really important for us to bring to people's attention is this notion of over-reliance and under-reliance. There is a tremendous amount of work that is being done at Microsoft, in OpenAI, and in other great companies like Google and Facebook, Meta now, about when do humans over-rely on information from the AI and when do humans under-rely on information from the AI. Now, this goes also back to some theoretical artifacts of how people understand things and what are they looking for when they look for information. Confirmation of bias is one of the well-known artifacts that everybody knows. When we look at some information, we are always looking for it to conform to our schema, our mental schema of how we believe things operate. Anytime a human or a machine produces information that runs against the mental schema that a person has of how things work, it is always viewed with skepticism. That's one of the ways in which people learn. Now, are you able to unlearn that in healthy ways is a really fundamental question. This is where professional development and a lot of conversations and community plays a very important role, because coaching people on when should they rely on AI, when are they over-relying on AI, and when are they under-relying on AI is still a very, very new thing. And it's something that we think about a lot at Microsoft, right? We don't want people to over-rely on AI. You don't want the radiologist to assume that everything that the machine is producing is somehow correct, or a teacher to assume that every text that they produce from the AI is correct. At the same time, you don't want them to dismiss it without due consideration either. So that is where professional development, training, community, and all of these other human endeavors become really important. How do you actually check this? Can the AI itself say, hey, I'm not so sure, I think it's an 80% probability. By the way, every time the AI produces an answer, it does know what probability it is that it's producing the answer with. So how do you make that available to humans? All these are considerations, right?
As you said, I love the confirmation bias, right? That's so true. And it makes me think, as I sit here and listen to this and reflecting, as we prepare for a new school year and I keep saying a new world, right? Because wave is coming, like it or not.
Yeah.
But it's almost, and as educators, as administrators, as schools, we often just jump to the tool, right? You got to learn this tool, right? We paid all this money, or we spent all this, learn the tool. But listening to YouTube makes me think too, this is almost, we got to take a step back. It's almost a little bit more of a philosophical, emotional conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because you said to any of our teachers, do you want your kids to check their kind of implicit bias? Do you want our kids to just accept knowledge as is, or do you want them to question it? Think, of course, we're all going to say, of course, they need to question it, But it can be hard for us to kind of mimic or to do what we are asking our students to do, right? Because we just get so ingrained. So anyway, I appreciate that. It makes me think that maybe we need to start broader before we jump into what's the best way to prompt.
Yeah. I mean, the mechanics are important. Don't get me wrong, right? Like you need to know how to operate the machinery that sits in front of you. But at the same time, critical thinking is an apex learning skill. And not all of us are very good at it. I mean, we are very good at it in some avenues, and some avenues we are not. I mean, that goes to everybody. No person is equally critically good with everything that they deal with. And when you're dealing with the vastness of the data and information that goes into building AI, you all of a sudden are faced with that in a much more direct way than you did before, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I love you returning to this kind of apex learning and all these things. I will say too, as in my very kind of specific lens of LD, right? LD schools and LD kids, they often thrive at the apex, and it's these bottom skills. And I think as schools, we have to figure out a balance, looking backwards and looking forwards about how do we do this? Because one of the challenges and opportunities we're going to have is what may no longer be important to focus on for our kids, or to just drill in order to better foster, develop, and exercise these apex skills, which they're so good at. And that's going to be a tension of, is mastering the semicolon still as important as it was yesterday? I would argue probably not was that important, but that's okay. Anyway, it's good because it's just all schools are going to deal with it. I think with LD schools and an LD school audience, it's a more even challenging question, because that's, we could not assume our kids, those came easily to our kids. Now maybe it doesn't need to come easily to our kids like it did 3 months ago. Right.
Yeah, things are changing.
Yeah. So kind of on that, out of curiosity, and you may not know, but again, coming from my very specific lens, a very biased lens, and my agenda-driven, the reason I'm having these conversations, and one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by this, is I hope that we see a bit of an educational revolution, as we've talked about, a transformation from memory-based to more skills-based to critical thinking, all those things. And I don't want LD kids to be lost in that mix. I don't want us to perpetuate the privileges that currently exist in our system, which I would argue very few kids actually have the privilege of accessing in the first place, and that we do a better job representing all learners. And so in my very kind of immature, shallow understanding of how things work, I want somebody to be feeding these machines writing samples and spelling samples of LD kids. Do we know if that exists? And am I thinking, am I just inaccurate in my understanding of how this could work? But, if we fed it enough, could it become a diagnostic tool? Could we recognize not just that that's spelled wrong, but eventually be able to see some patterns potentially? And I'll pause there, but.
Yeah. So I think your question is, can you make all of these AI systems more grounded in the data that you have and are specific to your context? And can all of these systems start to function more towards the kinds of things that you need? that is one of the big things that Microsoft has already been doing, right? Like bring your own data to the mix. Now, Microsoft will never say feed student data into our models because we don't use customer data for training our models, right? Like, I mean, it's one of the big things, right? Like, so if you pay for a service, you paid for it, and we don't use your data to do other things. It's as simple as that. It's trust. But customers can say, hey, I have all these essays that I want to ground my AI on, and we have technologies that will allow you to do that. These technologies are still very much in their infancy, and they're just starting out because these tools themselves. I mean, look, in January or in November of last year, people were not that up on these things, and the notion of grounding was very much unknown to people, right? But grounding is a process by which you take data from your local context and then tell the AI engine, hey, bring your general knowledge, but operate more on this data set that is specific to me, right? You see that kind of thing that in Azure today. Microsoft has announced a lot of tools, not today, but they announced it like a few weeks back, where you can bring your own data and tell the AI to behave in specific ways. That revolution will come in a pretty big way, because the challenge, Josh, that I pointed out is personalization. How do you personalize without knowing the local context of somebody? And more importantly, how do you know the local context of somebody in a privacy-aware way, in a way that fosters trust and safety? Those are all very big challenges, and we're working a lot to answer some of these questions. And hopefully very soon we'll have interesting things to say about it, but not right now, right?
Sure. Yeah, and that's fair. That's fair. Yes, and again, when I put my advocacy hat on, I also would always say too, right? So there's the personalization thing is so important, right? And I think even though when we think about how do we help people learn, 20% of the population learns through this lens of LD, right? So how do we just make sure that that is represented as we go forward, right? So again, I think it's an opportunity to stop thinking as learning as right or wrong, but learning, to your point, as personalized. And how
and it's a process, right? And there is twists and turns in the process. It's not linear, right?
Right, exactly. And we can go on forever, but it's not linear. And in ways it can be for certain disciplines, and the same kid can have a tremendous difficulty with what you think would be easy based that they can do X. Why is Y so difficult, right? But again, it's to your point about personalization. And we only have about 6 minutes left, but I have a few more things I want to get to. One is a question in the chat, Bill Chamberlain, who is kind enough to come to all of these, I think. And he asked a question, so I want to make sure I get to it. And he kind of, again, going back a little bit philosophically, that point of, is the semicolon even important anymore? Using maybe that as an exemplar of a larger category or a larger conversation, what do you think, as we talk about these apex skills, what do you think might become devalued moving forward in terms of education? Not because it may not be as necessary as it once was. Do you have any kind of philosophical rants on that?
Yeah, I think the things that will become less important are rote memorization and remembering a tremendous volume of things that sometimes are useful, sometimes not. By the way, I do believe that memorization helps because it actually triggers connections, and it allows your subbrain to process in very interesting ways. It's pretty important, not that it's not. But can we do it in a way where it's not the central focus of your evaluation? That's the big question. I think that evaluation that is based purely on memory will, for example, be a thing of the past, right? For simply because you can get any answer right now, even without all the AI, you can just go on Google or Bing and you can just get all the answers that you ever wanted. So that has already been changing. I also think that just mundane processy kinds of things, right? Like, so I'm going to copy this notebook and put it over there and organize my information from semester to semester in a very specific way. And next semester, I have to recreate all of these cycles, and all of that will will change quite significantly in terms of workflows and workloads in the processes for preparation for teaching or learning. And also the kinds of reflective tools that we are using will evolve quite a bit, right? Like your ability to capture your learning in interesting ways will change, right? Right now, there are a few interesting ways of capturing our learning, but those ways are very much rooted in things of the past. Here's a simple example. When I was going to school, handwriting was a very important thing, right? Like, so, hey, are you able to do cursive writing really, really well? How many schools really, really train on handwriting today or evaluate students on handwriting today? That's changing. Now, not that the written word is not important, writing is important, but whether you use a certain 4-line rules in terms of how you write, that has become less important. Similarly, people just using just-in-time information, that will change, right? Like exams today, for example, are like, oh, don't bring in all your stuff. You have to just process all this like from what you know. Now, what happens if you say you can use any tool? I'm going to ask you questions that are really, forcing you to use your skills and use your knowledge as opposed to just, reproduce something based on what you already have in mind. Those are all the kinds of things that will change. Teacher workflows will change a lot. So generally speaking, those are the big things in big areas that I think will immediately change over the next couple of years. So.
And that's so helpful. And one point to make about that, and then a quick follow-up question before we start to conclude. I completely agree. And to your point about assessment, what I think we are underappreciating and not talking enough about is how well systems like ChatGPT-4 perform on assessments that yesterday and today that we overvalue, right? We determine your score on the LSAT or your score on the GRE, all these things to distinguish your capabilities. And now it's just distinguishing capabilities that are better done by a machine. And what is that going to mean?
Yeah, and look, all of the exams that the AI models today are just acing have one thing in common. They're all traditional. Some of them may be more creative endeavors, but nobody has actually asked the algorithm to do things like, how should humans feel about this? What are the ethical considerations of what happens when you actually have this AI do the things that are doing? How do you create appropriate trust? Is this information truly valuable to the human, at that point in time, given their life circumstances? How do you change life circumstances as a practice? There are larger, set of considerations that, look, we are just starting to imagine what the new wave of assessments will look like, right? If one thing there is that I believe in truly is humans' ability to be creative. And we created this machine. We can create something that makes this machine do interesting things or change our behaviors in an interesting way, right? The AI systems will, there is something called model drift in AIs. Over time, the AI system will slowly drift towards, artifacts that it thinks are important in its model and mathematics. But humans evolve way faster than these algorithms do in some cases, right? Like, so imagine you touch a hard surface and all of a sudden your reaction is pulled back. You will never touch a hard surface again. But I don't know if the AI is that fast at learning it. So, there are some things, where the AI is actually slower to learn, right?
Interesting. It's kind of, it potentially is a bit of a race in terms of that's interesting. All right, 2 concluding questions. One, to kind of expand upon what you were saying in terms of, in the next couple of years, the next few years, things are changing. I'd love to get your thoughts on how quickly do you think these things are coming? And, there's, and I'm embarrassed to even be saying this to you because obviously you have a doctorate in this, but the concept of Moore's law, right? This idea that there was a prediction, I think in the 70s, that computational power would kind of double every 2 years. Do you feel like that kind of trajectory is what we need to be thinking about with AI, that it's that rate of improvement and therefore adoption and change?
Look, Moore's law works on electrical, electronic, mechanical systems, right? Like, so there is something about the atomic structure of things that causes the scale out to happen in a certain way. But I used to work a lot in nanotechnology once upon a time as well. So I've spent a lot of time with scientists who think about it. But the changes that are happening in AI are going much faster than any other technology that we've seen so far, right? Like, so they're happening rapidly. They're happening in ways that are very profound, and that is a good thing, and that's a challenge. Right? And this is part of the reasons why humans are very uncomfortable with some aspects of this. Teachers are uncomfortable with some aspects of this because it's evolving at a very rapid pace. Anything that you say about AI today has just evolved like, like crazy by the time I finish the sentence, right? So the rate of change is quite fast, and the changes will come very fast. However, whether it's going to look like Moore's law, I don't necessarily think that that'll happen, because look, in the context of AI, there's a lot of conversation about quantum machinery, right? Where what happens if your computing is all of a sudden capable of like 1 billion times more, right? Like, so that those kinds of computing advances will all of a sudden also change our ability to process. They're all quite some ways out, because there is a lot of experimentation and instability when you get into those regimes which are at the nanoscale, for example. So the Moore's law metaphor might not be the best for AI, but the change is quite rapid, right?
I appreciate it so much. So the change is quite rapid. And even with what we can do now, that's going to create change, right? I mean, we don't even need advancements at this point.
Yeah, and we've not even absorbed that yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been so wonderful, Krishna. So wonderful. Thank you. And I have to give you, so many compliments, but one is you do a beautiful job of, I'm sure, translating what is effortless and much more complex in your head in terms of machine learning and science, and making it accessible to all of us. So thank you for that. I'd love, as we conclude, I always try to ask people, what are 3 things that you would encourage us to read, to listen to watch that can be applicable to our conversation, or just things that you think are fascinating in general?
Yeah. So look, we are going through a lot of change as humans, right? So the kinds of things that I would read are related to how we as humans can approach change. One of the books that I'm truly fascinated by is Adam Grant's book on Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. Essentially talks about how you harness doubt and make that a key strength for you, and how you unlearn and learn to unlearn. So that would be a wonderful book for us to read, and Adam does a really fantastic job of giving practical tips on how to do it. So that would be a phenomenal book for everybody to sort of read and understand, particularly in these times of change. The other really interesting book that I would think that people should read is this book by Cathy O'Neil called Weapons of Math Destruction. She calls them WMD. It is about how algorithms and big data can create and reinforce biases and inequalities in our society in various domains. Whenever we talk about mathematics, there is a sheet of invincibility that goes on top of all of us, and we say, "Well, the math can't be wrong." Actually, it can. So this book is a phenomenal book. It's talking about big data and so on. There is some other pretty interesting books that people should read. For example, Carol Dweck's Mindset is a pretty important book. People think that the book is called Growth Mindset, but it's not. It's actually just mindset. She talks about fixed and growth mindsets in that, and what are the pros and cons of each. So, and it's all grounded in great research. So these are all some of the things that I would think are general things that people should read about. And just to demystify this sheet of invincibility that somehow sits in front of mathematics, right?
I love that. And I read Think Again, several years ago when it first came out, and I hadn't thought about it in this context until just now. So I love that. I love that idea of harnessing doubt, and what that means even more so now as we kind of navigate this. And I really love Weapons of Math Destruction. That really, because in 6th grade, that's definitely how I felt about it. I felt like this was just one giant arsenal against me. So I appreciate that. Well, Krishna, thank you so much. We went a little over time, so thank you for your patience with that. This was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So appreciate it. We'll get it up, and I know so many more people will also benefit from it. So thank you for your time today and all you're doing to kind of help us navigate this brave new world.
Thank you, Josh, for thinking of me to bring me in, and also to thanks to all the people who listened in, and would love to hear from all of you. So
wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Krishna. Enjoy the beautiful Seattle day. I won't let this be the last time we talk.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Take care.